Hi, so welcome to my submission for Cloudspokes challenge, generic parser support for single element node lists. So this is an extension to previous challenges that I've worked on. Specifically, it's designed to cater for a message where a element that contains a primitive type value repeats within a complex type. So for the example I was given was an address where, so an address complex type that contains multiple address lines. So what I did was update the object attribute map entity so that it had a new field called source cardinality. So the example I'm showing you is the one I spoke about, address. And as we can see here, the address line mapping has a cardinality of 0 to many. So what it's telling you is that in the source message, within the address node, we can expect to see address line repeat 0 or more times. What that means is that when we're mapping to the target object, the target attribute must be a list type collection of the primitive target data type specified. So in this case we would expect it to be a list of strings. So to give an example of that, I'll go to the developer console. So this is the underlying class that you can see here. As you can see, address line, list string. Back to the object map. Obviously, for all the sort of standard types of attribute maps, there's the other option you can select is 0 or 1, where you're basically mapping it explicitly one-to-one with a attribute on the class. So again, an example, address type, go here, and then as you'll see, that's just a string value, has another collection type wrapping around it. Again, back to the object map. One thing to note about the solution for this challenge is that it's not possible to use the create attributes map in conjunction with the object attribute map of 0 to many. What will happen is if you have this option ticked, then it will arbitrarily select one of the values held in address line to map or to add into the attributes map for that class. So again, to give you an example here, if all of these attributes were being added into this attributes map, then if address line was found, say it was found 2 times, then only one of those entries would get added to attributes. Okay, so how does it do this? So go to the document mapping utilities class, made a couple of updates. So the first is to the transformations method, or sorry, the transform method. As it's performing each of the object map and attribute map transformations, if it finds an attribute map transformation, it also adds a cardinality attribute onto the target document that represents the class. So what it's doing is it's mapping a source document to a target document. The target document is a representation of the class that ultimately we'll be mapping onto. So to give you an example, this is a target document. As you'll note, the structure of this target document resembles the class or the AVIX class that we've defined. So obviously order is the top level entity, and order consists of line items, addresses. Line items consist of parts. To highlight the change I've made, so we can see here, for instance, 2 address lines were found. cardinality on these is labelled as 0 or many, whereas on all the other attributes it's 0 or 1. So that's the first stage. So we have a target document representing the class. The next step is to turn that target document into a JSON string that can then be deserialized onto the class itself. So that's where the other change is. So if we find the XML node to JSON methods, so this method basically processes the complex types within the target document. Within a complex type, we then call a method called XMLChildNodes to JSON. If we take a look at that, basically what we do is we set up a map which will contain each of the attributes for the complex type. So this is where we process out each of the attributes. So we grab the attribute name and the attribute value. We then have a look to see whether we're creating an attribute map. If we are, then we just put those values directly into the attributes map defined at the top here. If we're not dealing with creating attributes map, then the next thing we have a look at is the cardinality, and if it's 0 to many, we do a check within the attributes map to see whether it already contains an item with the same attribute name, and if it does, then basically what we do is we add the new attribute value into the list of values. So for instance here we can see that we remove the closing list bracket, we add a comma, and then we add the new attribute value, and then we add the closing bracket. If the attributes name is not already in the attributes map, then we initialize it, creates a list bracket, and insert just a single attribute value in there, assuming that we'll probably find more as we loop through the child nodes. If the cardinality is just 0, 1, then again we just literally just add the attribute name and value directly into the attributes map. Once we have our attributes map, at the end of this method, we basically decide whether the attributes map is being cast directly onto an attributes map on the target class, or whether we're just going to be mapping each of the attributes directly to an attribute on the target class. If we're mapping into an attributes map, then we just literally loop over them, add each of the attributes into the map. If we're mapping the attributes directly to the class attributes, then we just literally add them into the JSON string as they are. So what you expect to see out of this, if I just run a quick execute statement, so all this is really doing is it's executing an object map on a sample document, and it's then deserializing the JSON string that's created into an object and then reserializing it, just so you can take a look at before and after and make sure they're the same. Execute that, take a look at the debug log. And scroll across. So basically this last line is the JSON representation of the class that we've deserialized our document into and then reserialized out of. And what we can see, for instance, here is an example, address lines. That's an example of where we have more than one address line for that address. So flat 1, 10 Glebe Road. That basically concludes my presentation. Obviously, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop me an email. I'll try and answer them. Equally, if you've find any bugs with what I've written, and obviously I'm happy to fix them. Just again, drop me an email and let me know what the problem is. But hopefully it'll work great for you. Yeah, let me know any issues. Thanks.